Things off.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our fifth session of the day. This is of course, the Art of Armor Zoom conference to benefit History Live Northeast. I'm Matt Blazek, Executive Director, and I'd like to welcome someone who has been highly influential, basically to almost anyone who has interest in armor for the past, I'm not even sure, 30 years, 35 years. Wade Allen is joining us. He's going to give us a talk about his experiences and how-to tips for starting your own collection. Wade, take it away.
Thank you. How-to tips and various other random things. Everybody has to start a little bit with where they came from and what their background is. And mine is about as different from Ugo's as you can possibly get. I'm not an artist, not in any way. I became interested in armor. I blame it on a trip to the Tower of London when I was 7 years old, but ever since things have been different. So before high school, I was actually visiting museums and starting to read books and learn about armor. In high school, I was in a metal shop class and accidentally ran across this guy in the same class named Aaron Toman. And we started building armor together. And thus was formed Valerius Armories over the next 8 or 9 years. So I'm interested in armor. Armor as a thing, armor as a history, armor as a thing to study. And so I've built a collection. At first it was very small. I built armor. I mean, as a high school student, you just can't afford to buy armor and travel all over the world looking at museums. So you do what you can. I built armor, I bought armor. It goes back and forth, back and forth. And I kind of still build a little bit of armor. The thing I'm most famous for over the last 15 years is building armors for my kid. So I built small ones as he grew up over time. Those ended a few years ago. Okay, so we can just sort of start with a little bit of background. While I'm talking that through, that little picture you see there was the Allen collection at one point. That was everything I owned in, I guess, my second year in college. There were a couple little bits, but that was it. If you're thinking about building a collection, or really just building armor, any of this, you need to learn. You need to understand what it is you're trying to do, what you want to buy or what you want to make. So I kept it simple. Books and museum trips are a lot cheaper than fakes. It's also a lot easier than, just continuing to bang your head into making something that just doesn't turn out right. You've got to look at things. You've got to study them. You've got to study them as close up as you possibly can and as much as you can to understand the form for making or for collecting. Just a few notes, if you do get into collecting, it's amazing how little provenance is associated with many pieces. Really, if you look through an auction catalog, most of the things will have almost no background at all. Every now and then you'll say, was formerly in this collection. That's about it. There's no scientific testing. You don't get a materials analysis with a piece if you buy it. So you're relying on your expertise combined with how much you trust the person who's selling something to you. That's why your expertise is important. The next thing I have on here is something I've never managed to do. Decide what interests you and focus on that. Since I'm interested in European armor, 14th through 17th century, that's way too wide. And I just end up buying little bits and pieces all over the place from everywhere and just filling up the place with stuff. That's a really good way to get sidetracked and waste money on things you weren't really planning on doing. And it's also a good way to buy outside of your area of expertise. And the same thing happens when you make things. An armor knows something. They really get deeply into it. Recently, one of the things I did last year was buy a salade from Francois L'Archevêque because he does them. I mean, he knows salades. He's got the eye. And I usually don't buy Modern Armor, but his stuff is so good in the salades that I had to do it. So getting a focus really would help, and maybe someday it would be good if I had a focus. Most of the people you deal with who are buying are actually sort of combination dealers, collector dealers. So what they'll do is they'll buy something, look at it, play with it, and then move it on. And that's a great way to study. You can really get your hands on a lot more pieces that way. I always find something interesting in each one of my pieces, so I almost never get rid of anything. I have sold things, but really very little. It's a terrible way to do things. I don't encourage it. It's very expensive. Sometimes you can get connections with somebody who's doing one of these things. For a while, I was buying knives, and there's a guy named Simon Moore who was writing a book called Cutlery for the Table, which is really not a bad book on cutlery for the table. And he got connections, and he was buying from sort of all the muddlarks he could find in various places. So he had a lot of pieces going through his hands. And I connected up with him. So when he finished with things, he would sell them on off to me. So I was getting, lots of 10 and 12 knives that were pretty good ones coming, over the pond every so often. That was a good way to do things. As I've said, in my case, I'm into, construction and form and function and development and the styles. And so almost any bit of armor can turn out to be interesting for me. And that's a real problem, but that's the way of things. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of walk through some particular pieces starting from right when the collection started and give you an idea of what was going on and what I was doing. Back in high school, I'd already read Claude Blair several times, already was putting together a small library. Erin and I were already building armor. But we ran across the William Fagan catalog. Now it's called Fagan Arms. And you could get these little catalogs in the mail, and there was some armor in it. And the first piece there on the left is an elbow from, mid 16th century, could be a little later. It cost $75. I spent my allowance money on it in high school, but it's really not a bad piece. I still own it. It has good form. It has a lot of nice details that show you what that kind of piece should look like and how it should work. It has a crack in the middle, a little piece busted out, and a little bit of deformation, but mostly it's really pretty good. So it's not a bad piece to keep around and study. The piece on the right is a pauldron, later 16th century. Erin and I were flipping through the catalog again, and we found two pauldrons. And so we bought both of them. Erin bought one and I bought the other one. And I spent more. I spent $97.50. His was $95. So he got the cheap one. Really, his is probably a better pauldron. It's more real and a bit less mangled than this one. This one's a little earlier, but his is really a nicer piece. But this was where we started and where the collection came from. Moving on to college, I was studying for 6 months in Oxford, not at Oxford University, but in the city. And the Park Lane Arms Fair came up, and so I took the train down to London and wandered around and looked at things, and there was a lot of fun stuff to see. One guy had a pile of Kevasets. I mean, they were just stacked up on top of each other like baseball caps. And there was a pauldron that, oh, I really should have gotten it. It was a lined pauldron. It was beautiful. There was a nice little burgonet that was fun. But these were the pieces that I ended up sort of settling on, mainly because I didn't have any money. And I dickered with the dealer and played around and came up with a price. This was 125 pounds for both of them put together. And then I had to tell him that I didn't have 125 pounds. So I had to go back to Oxford, and coincidentally, my parents were living there for the year or two, and get the rest of my lunch money handed over to me so that I could send him a check and have him send me the pieces. So you can start to build a collection on small amounts of money if you really work at it. Okay, so at this point, we had access to 2 pauldrons and these, the gauntlet in the arm, the elbow, and a knee cop and a couple of other little bits and pieces. And we used what we learned out of those pieces. Those were invaluable for actually showing you how a 16th century gauntlet works, what it needs to do. The shape is, it looks like, it's a conical cuff, and it's some lames on the back of the hand, and it's some fingers, and yeah, it's all very simple, but it actually works in ways that are a bit unintuitive. So we had a gauntlet to work from. We had an arm that showed how the geometry of the arm really works, how the rotating collar works, and a pauldron that showed us how a pauldron really worked. So we were able to use things we learned from those to build this half armor that we did for the Higgins Armory. It was for their education department. And they still have it. Well, they still have most of it. We did some other work too for them. The last time I saw it, I don't know where the tassets are, and I don't know if the gauntlets had disappeared, but this was for their education department. I've seen some pictures from the WAM that has now inherited their things with a kid dressed up wearing it. It was an interesting piece to do. We got a little weird, and that helmet is made with a 2-piece skull that's actually rolled over each other, so there are no welds in the armor at all. But that shows what you can do with the same sort of overlapping set of knowledge. Now we go on to more firsts. This was the first piece of mail that I ever bought. I was wandering around the Baltimore Arms Fair and trying to find armor. I go there a lot. I have managed to get some good things there, but there really is very little there. I just tend to go in hopes that there will be something again. At the time, I had almost nothing. I had these little bits and pieces like the ones we've seen. And so I was trying to move up to the next level. And I saw this shirt of mail, and I was looking at a 2-piece, Munich Town Guard is what they always call it, the black and white morions with a fleur-de-lis on the side. And I went back and forth and back and forth. I ended up buying this. It's not a bad piece. It's Eastern European. It has some very interesting construction to its rings that really date it or move it over there. It's definitely not Western European. And I was buying outside of my area of expertise. I still don't know as much about mail as I should. I know enough to know that this isn't Western European, and it's later, 17th century probably, could even be a little later. It was probably better than buying the Morion, but I probably overpaid for it, as these things happen. So not knowing what you're really looking for and not knowing about it is a great way to spend extra money. Cabasets. We're still back in the beginning of the collection. I own no helmets. I had only bought that shirt of mail. I didn't have a helmet. I wanted some helmets. I was getting catalogs from Wallace & Wallace at the time. And I saw this catalog, and they had, I don't know, 5, 6, 7. It was a big number of cabasets all listed right in the auction. And it was new to me. I wasn't into auctions yet. And so I filled out their little form and faxed a written bid in, and I knew I wanted to get one. So I put in a bid on each of 5 of the ones that looked worth owning. And when the auction was over, I found out that I'd bought all 5. I didn't know that on a written bid, you could say or you could say up to two, or any of those interesting things that would defend you from doing these strange and bizarre things. So after a while and paying for it, I ended up with a box arriving in the mail with bubble wrap and 5 stacked up camisettes next to each other. It was kind of fun. First breastplate. I'm moving on, trying to build the collection here. Again, this was at the Baltimore Arms Fair. One of the collectors who has a table there managed to put this on the table for some reason. He doesn't tend to sell things very much. And I looked at it and played with it and stared at it. It has good and bad things about it. It's a munition piece. It's rough from the hammer. It had been acid etched or acid dipped for cleaning. It was a big thing in the mid-century, in the 20th century, to just sort of clean everything with acid. It's a terrible thing to do. It mostly ruins any real collector value, but it doesn't eliminate the form. So I guess it was good for me. It has a nice shape. It allows you to learn a lot about what a breastplate from around 1600 really looks like. Simple rolls, turned in, not turned out, bigger at the neck, smaller at the arm, nice flare at the waist, a decent piece cod, decent shape. It's not a bad piece, actually. And years and years and years ago, it was $700, so it wasn't too bad. I still have it. I like it very much. It has nice hammer marks on the inside. So it's a neat piece for my collection to work with and to study. It's not really valuable in anything except a study sense. I'm rolling on along. I want a Burgonet. Again, I found it at Baltimore. This makes it sound like there's a lot of armor at Baltimore. There really isn't. But you can get one piece every so often. It turns out this was a little more interesting than I knew at the time. It was all spray painted black with black Krylon, flat black spray paint, just coated. One of the cheek plates is a replacement. It's an antique, it's associated, but the Burgonet is rough from the hammer, except one cheek plate that was actually polished when it was new. So it's old, but it didn't go with it. That was easier to find out after the paint came off. It turns out this is a form that's not very common on the market. This is sort of that Augsburg shape that you see in Pfaffenhauser, the nice Pfaffenhauser armors, with a very straight back and a more sort of sweepy into the comb instead of the hard line. I don't see many of these come up for sale, and it has a lining in it. It has an old lining. I mean, you can never tell how old, but it has a quite possibly working life lining in it. And that makes this piece interesting, at least to me. Okay, this is one of those don't do it's. Up to this point, I'd just been, buying bits and pieces. And I worked for IBM, as we said before we started, and I managed to get myself a business trip to Europe. And I booked the ticket funny so that I could stop by London and give myself a day in London as part of the transfer over into France where I was going. And I could stop by the Park Lane Arms Fair. It was going on the right time. Everything was scheduled beautifully. So I stopped by, I went, and there really wasn't any armor worth buying at the place. But I'd done all that work, and I was going to buy something. And I didn't have any suits. I just had some bits and pieces, and I went around and around and around and finally bought this thing. And all the pieces are original, but the main pieces. All the leathers are new, the belts are new, the shoulder straps are new, the nose guard is new. But other than that, the parts are okay. But they don't go together. They aren't even really very nice, exceptional versions of themselves. So I had that for 15 years at least. And I think I finally sold it off for about what I paid for it. So it's not the way to go. Don't get tied into buying something. First Morion, this one's a different version of the story. I managed to get another business trip to Switzerland this time, and Galerie Fischer was having a sale at the right time for me to play that game. It's really inconvenient sometimes to deal with auctions. Going and seeing the pieces in person. Oh, by the way, if you just want to play with armor, find an auction. If you happen to be in England or France or Germany, Italy, where they actually have these things, if you're near London and Bonhams or Olympia Auctions is having a sale, just go and look at the stuff. They let you pick it up and play with it, and there are no requirements that you actually have enough money to buy any of these things. They don't ask that at that time. You can just go play with it. And it's a fun way to do things. Anyway, the way the Fischer did things was they had their days for viewing, and you wanted to go see it to be able to really get your hands on. And then they had the sale, and there was a gap in between. And so it was going to end up taking about a week's worth of vacation time to, do all of it. So I had a business trip, and I let the company pay for my days in between, and I went back and did some work. But it can be sort of inconvenient dealing with an auction. You want to see the things to get your own personal opinion, but you spend kind of a good deal of money flying over and seeing things and hotel and living there to play the game. You got to compromise. You got to decide how much you trust the dealer and how much you are willing to risk it. And there's a little back and forth going. I have flown in and looked at several auctions, not nearly as many as I bought from. One thing you can do, and this is very straightforward nowadays. In the old days, you would ask for pictures and they would send you Polaroids in the mail. Nowadays, they just take more pictures with the digital camera and send them over to you. It's perfectly legit to look at an item in an auction and say, I need more pictures, send them to me. And you say, I want the inside, I want a profile, I want the front, I want to see the top, I want a detail of this. The person who takes the pictures is usually the secretary, so they're not very good at it, but they will send you pictures. Quality is highly variable, but they will send you pictures. There's a comment in the thing that said Sotheby's and Christie's New York used to have it. Yeah, I went up to one of those and there was some great stuff that I didn't get. That would have been fun. There was this Gothic breastplate. Anyway, never mind. Okay, so this is a breastplate I bought years ago, and this is another one of those tale of what you probably shouldn't do. I bought it years and years and years ago. It shows up in some of the pictures I have of my room hanging in the middle of a display. And the proportions just looked a little off to me. The armholes are short and the waist is low and it's long, and it doesn't look like most, 1580, I still have it labeled 1580, breastplates. It just looked funny. And so I allowed a collector dealer to get it out of me. And at the time he was making a suit, and so I built him a followed lame, and attached some tassets for him. I stamped the work, so all the modern work was stamped with a big nasty stamp to say it's modern. I'm not sure the guy liked it, but I insist on doing such things. Since then, I've seen enough more armor that this probably is a better piece than I thought it was. It's from earlier, 1550, 1560, and it's a relatively rare style that they were doing around then. It's a long-waisted one. The armor in the Met that was Henry VIII's, that was often called the Anne de Montmorency armor, is an example of one of these things. The waist is actually lower than they are typically, and so you get a different proportion. And they don't show up very often, so probably should have kept it, but oh well. This is my only piece of 14th century armor. That's all of it. you got it. It's 3 out of 4 plates. The original finger would have been four plates, would have had a tip that overlapped the last one. It's been published. It's been published 3 times now. Twice before I owned it, and Toby put in the first volume of his book as well. So it's the best documented piece I have also. It came up on eBay. I follow eBay and then I don't follow eBay, and it's just a lot of work to follow eBay. But some friends who were into armor did follow eBay a lot at the time, and they saw that this come up for sale, and they knew I had more money than they did, and they wanted to get access to this thing. So they allowed my purse to buy it so that they could play with it. And that's perfectly reasonable. Everybody won on that deal. It really is a late 14th century English set of finger plates off of an hourglass gauntlet. There aren't that many of them out there. So it's a tiny little thing. It fits in a little glass case over in the corner and gets sort of lost in the bookshelf. But for me, it's a really nice thing to have, because there aren't that many of them out there. Okay, I've been collecting for years and years and years and years, and all I've had is these little bits and pieces and that one half suit that I didn't really like. And armors keep coming up for sale. This is an example of something that shows up for sale, all the time, and I'll dig into it a little bit. I call them Frankensteins. This is one of the better Frankensteins, but what you'll see when a suit comes up for sale, almost every time, it's a mishmash of bits and pieces of junk. Sometimes it's all 19th or 20th century. Sometimes it's a breastplate that was from the 16th century, and then it's been pieced back together with all sorts of bits and pieces. Sometimes there's something in there worth buying. Sometimes there really isn't. Suits tend to sell for more because, they can be set up in somebody's living room. They can be put in the den, and somebody who doesn't know what they're looking for can have cool decoration. So they're often put together. They were put together for the Victorians. They've been put together all through the 20th century. Everybody's putting them together. So this was Frankenstein the second or the third that I was looking at during that time. And this is what it looked like. It also, well, without the stand, I added that. It also had a pair of strictly mid-20th century awful gauntlets with their fingers lost. I think the things that were coming out of Toledo in the mid-century and late 20th century, except without its fingers and no etching, and just sort of the nastiest version of it. So that's what I bought. And if you dig into it, it's basically okay. It's not a suit in any way, shape, or form, but the parts are basically okay. The breast and back probably go together, actually, but the back plate has a big loss at one armhole. It rusted away. The gorget, 17th century, maybe even later. The arms are about the right period, but they don't go with each other. They're 2 arms. It is not a pair of arms. It is 2 arms. You'll get these kind of descriptions. You got to be really careful. Oh, by the way, if you ever see in the style of, that means fake. It's their word for fake. So just to start that off. The pauldrons are not a pair. The elbows are not a pair, and the vambraces are not a pair. They may have come out of, sort of the same armory or something, but they're not a pair. They don't look too bad because they're on the opposite sides of the suit and you can sort of hide them away. If you look really carefully, the subtle ones, the tassets are not a pair either. They're different by 2 lames in the count. I think one's 9, one's 11, but they're the same style. They're from the same area and the same time period, but they're not a pair. And to deal with that, that's why one leg is sticking forward on the dummy. So they don't just sit right next to each other. So you can't just see straight out that they're not a pair. So this is, oh, and the morion is, end of the 16th century, 17th century. It doesn't go with the thing at all. It also is painted black conveniently because there's a lead patch in a side of it. Somebody basically filled it with Mondo. But the form is nice, and well, it came with the rest, and so I still like owning it. Many years later, I managed to get a clothes helmet that is of the appropriate period, little past the mid 16th century, to go with it. And so I've managed to put a clothes helmet on it that makes the armor much better. So these kinds of things happen. You look at what's there and decide how much of it is worth something to you and for whatever your use is. There is another quote full armor that I bought. Seeing it in the catalog page will give you an idea of how awful these things can be sometimes. I had wanted to own a clothes helmet. Clothes helmets cost money, though. They tend to cost a lot of money. You can get them under 10,000, but they usually go above that. And I just wasn't willing to spend that. So I didn't own a clothes helmet. I just wanted one for years. This suit came up, and it happened to be right at a bad time. The pound was high and various other things were going on with the economy. It might have been right after 2001 with the crash. And it's displayed terribly in the catalog. The shoulders are sagged on the dummy and it's all scrunched in. The legs are fake, absolutely. The arms are fake, absolutely. They're not even really good fakes. And so it came up. And I thought it might be a shot at a way to get a clothes helmet. The breastplate, backplate, gorget are perfectly reasonable. Now, they don't go with each other, but they're reasonable pieces as is. And the tassets are okay too. Honestly, this is really a munition armor. It's a munition full armor. There, I accidentally zoomed in on the Z pieces. Clothes helmet's not bad. Almost all of the parts are actually original. Another thing that happens with armor is people piece them back together. So a lot of the clothes helmets you get that come up for sale have a visor, this upper plate up there, and a ventail and a bever that don't go with the skull, or two don't go with the skull, or two of them are fake, and they get grafted together. And I think except for the rear neck lames, this one's all good. So I was pretty happy to end up with it. When it showed up, it's covered in varnish, which was a thing they did to try to prevent rust, but it had rusted under the varnish. That's why we got that brown mottled finish. So I carefully cleaned all the varnish off and cleaned the light rust out, being as good as I could to do absolutely no damage to the actual underlying thing. And now it's Renaissance waxed, and I need to keep it up every now and then. But when I looked at it, I knew what I was buying was a clothes helmet. And I think I had some back pictures. So I think I thought it was a breast, a back, tassets, at least, that were good. I knew the rest was fake. And that's how I bid, right? I didn't bid based on buying a suit. I bid based on buying the parts that I knew were worth owning for me. And that's a very different thing. For some reason, I was lucky and I got that one. It has a different set of arms hanging off of it right now. They don't match well, but they're at least from the right century. Another one of the odd bits and pieces that I got through a weird way of getting things. A collector who deals some sent me a random email out of the blue that said, I got this breastplate, are you interested? And what he sent was a picture of a solidly black painted mid 16th century Innsbruck breastplate. Yeah, painted flat black all over. Somebody took the spray paint can and painted the whole thing. And one of the gussets was falling out, and they were small pictures, but it looked like it had good shape, and it looked like it had some decoration. I couldn't prove it. I couldn't prove how good it was. I was just playing with some pictures over the internet. So I bought the thing, and it showed up in the mail, and that's an embossed black and white. It's like the ones in Graz and Coburg. I mean, it's not as nice, but it's in the same vein. It's a piece Ian Eaves, ex-keeper of armor at the Tower of London, has looked at. And, 1550 to 1560, officer quality, black and white armor is what it came out of. So the gussets were held on by brass rivets. I popped those out. I very lightly cleaned all the parts that needed to be white, just to get the paint off. And put new rivets in with washers on the back so they can be removed anytime they need to be, and put it back together. And I end up with is really a very nice piece. I have in the past had people try to buy it off of me with good reason. I know a guy who had a really good black and white that would go with it, but it had a bad breastplate on it. He really wanted this breastplate, but I can't part with it because I don't know that I'll ever be able to replace it. So got to keep it. This is a little bit, and if I have time at the end and they let me play, I'll actually show me playing with it. I brought it with me. It's nothing exciting from most people's point of view. If you were collecting armor as art, if you were collecting armor for display, you would pass this off and get rid of it, never would have bought it in the first place. But for me, since I'm interested in how this stuff works, this is a glorious piece. Yes, it's just a part of a gauntlet. It's got a half of one hand lame, metacarpal lame, and then the big metacarpal lame, the knuckle, and the finger lames. It has half of a hinge that would have held the thumb on. But this is late 15th. It could be right into the early 16th century. I say 1490, 1500. It could be 1510, but really no later than that. It's still built the way a 15th century German, what we call Gothic gauntlet, is built. It has sliding rivets everywhere. There are sliding rivets in the back of hand, at the knuckles, at the fingers. So the thing not only rolls up around your hand beautifully, it can extend and contract and twist some. It does things that many pieces of armor don't do. Even real ones from 30 years later. And since it was previously owned supposedly by Leonid Heinrich, who was an armorer at the Met, I don't know if he did this intentionally or if he just helped himself out. There's actually a bolt on the top and the bottom. You can see the bottom one easily, and you can see the top one if you look carefully. Those can separate the thing into two pieces. So you can actually get access to the back end of, the inside of the lame that's part of this finger manipulation. I didn't do that. It came that way, but it's a really convenient thing to have. It's a really neat piece if you're trying to learn sort of the biomechanics of a gauntlet. Okay, yeah, we'll try to get some time to play with that. I included these. I bought these as a lot. I was buying some other things at the same sale, and I didn't really need either of these things, but they went along with some other Pisan armor that I was picking up, and I've since sort of made a half suit out of it. These are cool because one of these is real and one of these is fake, and I mean, it's not close. This it isn't really fake. It's just awful. The one on the left is good. The one on the right is bad. And it's 20th century Toledo manufacturer kind of bad. Being able to pick out the differences between good and bad is really important, both for buying and for studying and seeing what you can see. Right here, what we see is a pointed cuff on the left and a rounded one on the right. Well, there are some 17th century rounded cuffs, but it's not terribly common. The point's better. We see a sweep in the cuff. On the right, we just see a cone, a section of a cone. That sweep, to greater or lesser extents, is gonna be there. Sometimes they're pretty straight, but they don't tend to be completely straight. We get a crease down the middle of the cuff. We don't have a crease on the other side. Yes, there are gauntlets with no creases, but we're just building up atypical things. More subtly, if you look at the back of hand and you look at your hand, the back of hand on the one on the left is shaped like a hand. It swells sort of on the pinky side and then it cuts back in at the knuckle, and it swells on the thumb side and then goes straight. You need to do that to fit a hand. Also, the back of hand plates aren't flat. They're just slightly dished, so the piece will droop forward, and I've got a piece to demo that. And then there's a comment in the chat that says, look at the knuckle plates. Yes, the knuckle plates on the one on the left actually cup. They cut down so you can bend your fingers and not look stupid. Armor shouldn't look stupid. It can't look embarrassed or stupid. The one on the right, if you bent your hand in it, it would look absolutely embarrassed. It would look like spikies out of Lord of the Rings. So there are a lot more subtle versions of this, but that gives you a first step at real, absolutely not real. Okay, so that's why I included those. I got to go back. No, there we go. This shows what happens when you get distracted and start buying weird things. Yeah, little metal stuff. It's a fun sideline, and it tends to be relatively cheap. So hey, let's pick up some antique stuff. I do have some little metal stuff that's far older than 14th century. My wife used to wear a 5th to 6th century Romano-British ring until she wore it so much that it got thinner and she had to stop wearing it. It was $20. I mean, who cares? It's an antique, just wear it. But the one on the left has some really good buckles in it. You got to know what you're doing to pick them out, but there's a king's head buckle in there, and there's some gilt buckles and gilt mounts, and some nice one-piece ones with integral mounts, and there's some brooches of various kinds. That's not a bad lot if you wanted to, start a collection of medieval and later buckles. The one on the right is mainly composed of 17th and 18th century shoe buckles. Those things are, $3 a piece. You can pick them up all over the place. So you need to know enough to know the one on the left is worth buying, and the one on the right, well, if you want 17th and 18th century shoe buckles, it's a fine thing to buy. But if you're into medieval, you just wasted your money. So I end up buying things that I don't know enough about, and then finding out it later. It can be a really expensive thing to do. The nice thing about these is they really are pretty cheap, so you can learn without losing a lot of money. Okay, so I put this page on the end to let us see how you can't trust the descriptions all the time. Okay, trust but verify is the right way to go. The dealer or the auction house wants you to buy. They want to make the items look as good as they can. They may not intentionally even be lying. I think sometimes they are, but these things happen. The piece on the left came off of eBay. There were two of us bidding. I have since started corresponding with the guy on the other side of that and bought things from him too. It was described as a 16th century breastplate circa 1560. Not a chance. No way. That's not 1560. It can't be. Now, you've got to know that it's not to know it's worth buying. But, you know, if you look at a piece like that and the tag says 1560 and you're working on building some armor for Elizabethan and you copy that, well, you just blew it. You need to know what you're looking at. In this case, the error was in my favor, like in Monopoly, bank error in your favor. That's not 1560. That's 1500, 1495 maybe, because the neckline dips pretty low and there's some change in necklines that goes on in those style breastplates. And it has huge rolls. I mean, they're massive. The points of some of those are 3/4 of an inch tall. And those are outward turned rolls. So they had to get the edge to line up just right. It's a neat piece. It has some major damage that ruins it for real collector, but it's a really nice piece for construction. The other pieces are sort of more normal. The description of the arm was accurate except for the date. They admitted to the restorations that are in it. The inner vambrace plate, the stop rib, and one lame are all modern. Now they have HHR stamped on the inside. So yeah, HRR. So I'm pretty sure H. Russell Robinson did the restoration on that. The character of the restoration is just like they were doing in the 50s around then for the Royal Armory's work. And it came from Claude Blair's collection. So in this case, I don't mind that it has restorations because, well, I can't get anything that early that doesn't. So, and it was honest and it was admitted. But it was sold as a late 14th century arm, and it's not. It's early 15th century. I mean, you know, that's a narrow distinction, but it's an important distinction. It does not have an internal hinge. It doesn't have the full tulip. It's just not a late 14th century arm. It's an early 15th century arm. And the wing has been trimmed. It would have been noticeably bigger when it was new. I guess as part of the damage, or who knows, sometime somebody hacked it down to be much smaller than it was originally. The cuisse on the right, it was sold as late 15th century. It's not. It's early 16th century. Still, you know, before I bid on it, I knew that it was early 16th century. And so I bid as if it was early 16th century, not late 15th century. All of this really matters because when you get into the 15th century, you get really, really expensive. Early 16th is expensive. Late 16th is almost manageable. 17th, normal people could collect if you wanted to without too much trouble. Early 16th is a nightmarish expense, and 15th is just impossible. You don't get it. It doesn't come up for sale, and when it does, the prices are just insane. So that's the way of that. Okay, so that was what I was going to share, and now I will pick a few pieces up and play with them. And people, I'm watching the chat too, or you can ask questions while you're at it. Okay. Somebody wanted to see that piece of a gauntlet. Yep, I brought it. I can't just pull out anything because to get real internet, I had to go to my sister's house. Okay, so let's see what we can do with this camera. It's a terrible camera, but there we go. Okay, so what can this do? It can slide in and out. It can roll up. Look at that. Isn't that glorious? And it opens up and it bends and it will even twist some. There you go. That's better lighting. So you can have it move in all of these crazy directions. And you can see the inside and play around. And yes, the bolts can be taken apart so that you can see what's going on. That's a fun piece for construction. Now, it's good to compare that one. This is a piece that I bought, and I probably got it because it's really pretty ugly. The cuff on it is just no great shakes. It was probably used as a bridal gauntlet-like thing, though since it doesn't have a nice finished edge, it probably would have had an elbow, you'd be used with an elbow cop. So like Toby's new late 15th century Innsbruck armor, he has a shoulder, an elbow, and then an elbow gauntlet that goes up into the counter. This could easily have been used that way. The reason that this one's fun is it has probably an original russeted finish, which is fun. And the plates just, let's see, pick the right angle. There we go. The plates just sort of work. Woo! And the fingers just roll. Let's do that. There we go. Look at how that moves and bends. See the utter lack of gaps as it moves? That's what you're trying to do. When you're making a piece, when you're making a mitten with overlapping plates like this, you want the plates to work like that. You're going to fail, but that's what you aim for. It's just, it's glorious. It's a lot of fun to play with. Any questions while I'm playing? Nobody asks. Okay, well, here we go. Okay, this is another one of those circa 1500 breastplates. This one's a little later than the other one. It has a much flatter neckline. But again, huge, massive rolls. Let's see if we can get them on there. There we go. Bad lighting. See, I guess slightly different place. There we go. Look at those big rolls and look at the angle they form. There you go. There's a view you don't normally see. A beautiful shape of the piece. That's a nice way to do things. And since I'm an armorer, or into the form of armor and make armor, they're goofy little pieces like this one that I really enjoy. That's the main plate on a Spalder, early 16th century. When did sliding gussets in the armholes replace the sliding upper and lower breastplates, or did they replace them? They're sort of different. There are actually some fixed gussets in the late 15th century on multi-piece Gothic armors, and there are some others. There's several ways the gussets can work. The gussets can be fixed but sort of rock. So you secure them at the top, you secure them at the bottom, and you can rock in a little bit by sort of flexing it. Or they can have slots and they can slide in and out. And there are a few, very few, but there are a few with some springs in there to push it back out. Usually they seem to either make the gusset work by securing the gusset to the buckle, and so you use the weight to the breastplate to pull it back out. Or they seem to have used some springy leathers to pop them out sometimes too, but there are springs. Somebody was talking about thickness measurements. Let's see. Thanks for the beautiful pieces. Yeah. That I am glad to have them. Yes, the video up. There's a comment about thickness measurements on that russeted gauntlet. My website has a lot of things that people probably don't see because they're buried, but there's a whole page full of weird pictures or weird pages of weird information and videos of armor. So for instance, I've got a bunch of videos that show a piece. It would be like, that piece, and it's rotating on a stand, and so you can see it all the way around, and you can replay it as often as you want. There's also a video of that russeted gauntlet with me taking a gauge to it and getting gauge measurements from all over the place. So that was fun too. Anyway, that's what a Spalder plate should look like. It isn't just a hemisphere or a quarter of a sphere. It's got all sorts of shape to transition from the shoulder to the arm dimensions. And we can tell that this is a right because of the location of the holes. No, it's a left, sorry. Sliding rivet, leather, leather. So it's a left. We'll go right there. That's how that works. Okay. You chasing me away, or you want to play with some more, Matt?
No. You've still got 4 minutes to do whatever you'd like.
Whatever I want. Well, we'll keep this one really quick. I mean, there's nothing special there. That's a Maximilian Tacit end plate, but again, we can tell by looking on the inside. I'm not sure you can, but the pictures on the website will do it. There would have been a leather here, and a sliding rivet there. So it's the bottom lame of a right tacit. It's early 16th century. The spacing is wide. Ugo was talking about the fact that he likes his rolls to go all the way rolled. That's very nice. This one wasn't. It's just a little fold, a little bump. There's no actual roll on the bottom, but it looks like there is. That's just the way they did it. Sometimes they do that for good reasons, like on the sides of a pauldron or the sides of a spalder or the sides of a tacit, where the plates need to compress and contract. And if you have a roll banging into a roll, it doesn't move. But if you do, a groove sliding in a groove, it does move. Totally goofy. Matt mentioned it just for fun. Since we talked to Jeff Wasson yesterday, this is a gauntlet he made. Look at those fingers. Aren't those fingers glorious? I love Jeff Wasson's fingers. I know it's a silly thing to care about, but he just does beautiful. You see all that nasty gapping when all the plates stick up? No, you don't, because it's not there. Look at that.
I'm sure Jeff loves his fingers too.
I can't get over Jeff's fingers. They're great.
Somebody was posting on Facebook, I saw yesterday, out of context quotes from the conference, and so I think this will be the next one they post. I love Jeff Wasson's fingers.
Yes, and just for fun, because we all get to play with this stuff. I wonder if I can actually show this. Yeah, there we go. This is 6mm modern Indian mail. This is not. That's a real piece of mail. And they just have nothing like the same character. And then to really be insulting, see if we can get there. There you go. There's the line. That's a real piece of 16th century mail. It's a mail collar, and it's just got that has nothing on it. It actually looks a lot more like the butcher's gloves. If you wanted a mail to simulate the operation, the real look of the extremely fine mail, not the big stuff, used in the 16th century for gussets and things like that, you're probably better off using butcher's stuff than riveted. It works better. So anyway.
All right. Well, Wade Allen, thank you so much for presenting today, showing us how your impressive collection came to be. It's quite a journey you've been on, and quite an endeavor it's been to build what you've built. So, but you know what's coming. You know the final question of your session and what it's going to be. So, Wade Allen, what is your favorite armor?
There's no such thing. There's too much good stuff out there. Sorry, you don't get it. I mean, there's the best, the piece I like the most, though not the best, of each individual style. There's the piece that's the coolest, late 16th century Greenwich gauntlet. Yeah, you get to a cool one of those, but there's too much good stuff out there. Best is such a silly, no, can't do that. No, not possible. Now, maybe most influential,
Hmm.
seeing the picture of the Avant armor in Claude Blair's book,
Hmm.
um, that's just glorious. Seeing the Kunstschott, the Gwyn armor, that's just glorious. There are some pictures in the Royal Armories of, I think it's the Smythe 16th century armor. It's just a part of an armor, but the proportions are just wonderful. So, there's all these different things that provide just a beautiful example of a type. Now,
Here's a
there's
good
some types that I,
question. John
yeah,
Mertz asks in the chat, which piece would you most like to add to your collection?
that again is just too hard. The problem is it's context dependent and all of that. And to be totally honest, for me, price is part of the game. So adding something that I just really love that I paid 3 times as much as I should for annoys me more than a piece that I like less, but I got a really good deal on. So it ends up being really strange. I've been trying desperately for my career to get myself a Gothic breastplate. There was a mention of the Sotheby's and Christie's shows in New York. That's why I went.
Hmm.
In about 1990, I went to one of the last of those big sales, and they were selling off stuff from the Met, and they were selling off all sorts of things. They had a Maximilian on horseback.
Wow.
And then they had a 3/4 Maximilian that had lost its greaves. The 3/4 Maximilian was much better. I would have much preferred it. But anyway, that was $80,000. I had no chance. But about 1990, I bid $10,000 on what was functionally 2 pieces of 15th century metal. It was an upper and a placard with a 20th century fold hanging off of it. But they were good. I mean, they really were good. It was stamped. It was a beautiful piece. It was probably Innsbruck or Italian Very export, because it was a very Germanic one, but it was a nice piece. I bid 10, the other guy bid 11. I would have had to bid 12. I mean, this was more money back then than it is now. And they had 20% on top. And then if you want to pick it up, you get to pay New York sales tax on top. And when you're adding 20% plus 8% and to what it would have been, who knows where it would have stopped. I was the underbidder, so maybe it would have stopped there. But, at the time, 12 plus, that would have been what, $16,000 in the end, was more than I was willing to go. And in some way, there are pieces that I wish I'd bought, and I really would have loved to have that. There was a Maximilian clothes helmet in that same sale that I didn't go high enough on, because they go for crazy money nowadays. I mean, they're bottom end 20 grand and go up from there. It's just crazy. I did manage to add kind of a Gothic breastplate last year. It's an upper breastplate and a lower breastplate, and they didn't go together when they were new. I mean, they don't, but Stephen Grancy had them together, and they were in the Allentown exhibit together. They've been together a while, and they can be pushed together. And as I remember, I got it for under 10. So,
fairly
hey.
good deal. So we are unfortunately we are out of time. We need to get the next session started. But thank you so much for speaking today. It's been a pleasure to have you and learn about everything you've done. It's been also fantastic to hear other speakers in the conference who have noted your influence on the armor world in itself. So again, thank you very much for being here.
Happy to be here.